pushing through the hard just means just doing it, just trusting that God has called you, He'll equip you, and just doing that day instead of sometimes we just focus way too big, just doing that day. How can I do this day well, and how can I glorify Him?
Hi, welcome to the Zan Tyler Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zan Tyler Podcast, where our goal is to help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Let me take just a minute to ask you, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or watch, including YouTube, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well. I'm excited to welcome Leigh Nguyen back to the podcast for the second half of our two-part conversation. Like many of us, she never meant to homeschool, but she now finds herself 14 years into it with 2 homeschool graduates and 1 more to go. Leigh is the host of Little Homeschool Podcast and Conference, so it's my joy to welcome Leigh back. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com. So one of the things I know you talk about a lot, Leigh, is pushing through the hard. So tell me what you mean by that. So, because we've talked about really enjoying the high school years, but they can be really hard too. All of homeschooling can be hard, and all of it is glorious and hard at the same time, So I don't want to paint a bad picture, and I don't want to paint this perfect picture either of no struggles along the way. So when you say to push through the part hard, just tell us what you mean and how you did that.
Yes, I'm all for being realistic because there are hard times. For me, the 24/7 without a break was hard. That was hard for me. And maybe it comes easily to some moms, but I had this vision in my mind of when my kids would all be in school and I would actually get a break. And so it took me many years, probably all the years of homeschooling, to wrap my mind around it's okay to not have that break of 7 hours for 5 days a week. God will sustain me. Just keep leaning into that and find ways that I can maybe get a little bit of a solace of a break. And there were times like we talk about co-ops, and there was times where I could find a co-op and get a little bit of a break during that co-op. Or maybe I had to volunteer. I'd be like, I'll volunteer in the nursery and hold all the babies. And to me, that was a little bit of a break and with their education. But it just the no breaks was really hard, and I had to learn to die to my selfish desires of wanting that break, of thinking that I needed that break, that the Lord wasn't enough to sustain me, and He wouldn't provide enough rest for me and enough peace for me, and so I had to work through that, through all the homeschooling years. And we can homeschool, and it can be hard. Those two things, it's not that we have to homeschool and it has to be perfect. We can homeschool through the hard. And there were some seasons of hardness, whether it was character, whether it was difficulties in the family, finances. We moved one year and to a different state. And so that year of moving and then homeschooling, it was hard. But we kept doing it. I felt so blessed that we homeschooled. So when we moved, there wasn't this big adjustment. I remember the night before public school started in that area, we were sitting out in the backyard roasting s'mores, and there was not a care in the world for my kids. And I was like, if they were in school, they'd be so stressed right now about the next day and starting at a brand new place, not knowing anybody. And there was just no stress. And I was like, just thank you, God, for just this blessing that we had this big, huge move that we felt He wanted us to make, but then We didn't have to go through all of that stress. So there's times, and we can choose difficult academics. We can choose some rigorous curriculum. But my hard was because there's always training, and there was always discipleship. The training of maybe the chores, or training of who knows, whether it's practical types of things or just the discipleship, just working to reach their hearts. And so that's what felt hard for me, was just that I was always on for so many years. And I think that it's an overall kind of like, yes, there's probably about, I think for most homeschool moms, there's probably about 10 years that are hard, that like are the hardest.
Yeah.
And, then you get to that other side and you're like, oh, okay, I made it through. And going back to the beginning when I was just talking about the fact that, God called me to do this. It was just my job was to do it. And so getting through those 10 years, and then, the past couple years have been comparatively quite easy and a lot more fun. But because we just kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other. So, pushing through the hard just means just doing it, just trusting that God has called you, He'll equip you, and just doing that day, instead of sometimes we just focus way too big, just doing that day. How can I do this day well, and how can I glorify Him?
And, it's interesting because when I did your podcast with you, you asked me one of my favorite memories. I think one of my sweetest memories came when my daughter was trying to think if she would have been in probably the 7th or 8th grade. And both of my sons were away at college. They were both at Covenant College at the time. And my oldest son lost the eyesight in his right eye due to migraine medication. And so he had to quit playing soccer. And Ty handled it with faith. I was devastated. And we would make the 350-mile drive up there like every other week, Lizzie and I would. And there were doctor's appointments, and we kept up with our homeschooling. She and I did. But I was depressed. I never said, God, I'm mad at you, but I was disappointed, and I guess I was wearing it on my sleeve. And so some people on Lookout Mountain where Covenant College is, had let us borrow their mountain house, Lizzie and I, to be with the boys for a couple of days, and we all stayed there together. And so Lizzie was sharing a room with them, and she came and got in the bed with me one night about 2:00 in the morning. And she said, Mommy, are you awake? I said, yes. She said, I've been appointed by the family to ask you a question. And I said, okay, Lizzie, shoot. I knew this was not going to be good because it couldn't wait. And she said, you've always taught us that God is good and God is sovereign. And we want to know when you're going to start living that way again. And, I thought, well, first of all, I wanted to be angry, but it was my precious daughter. I could not be mad at her because I knew she was right. But on the inside of me, I wanted to yell and scream, this is my son. If I want to be mad and depressed, I am going to be mad and depressed. And then I realized it's not that they're always watching, but they had internalized some things. And I was so thankful that they could see where I was failing and say something to me about it. I don't know. It was a really precious, sweet, sweet moment. So all the caregiving and the character development and the time you spend with them teaching the gospel, in many ways, they come back and bless your lives in ways your life is a mom and a dad, in ways you just never anticipate or expect.
That goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Just one of the benefits that I have found to homeschooling is the relationship that we have, and how well we know our kids. We can know them no matter what our educational choices are, but with homeschooling, we are around them all the time, but also how much they know us. I know that my kids know me so much better than I knew my parents at their
Mhm,
age,
mhm.
because of the time that we spent together. And so that's just really neat that she noticed. Well, all of them noticed, and they nominated her.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Lizzie, this is yours.
But they noticed that, mom's not doing what she said, and that they lovingly came to you and said
Mhm.
something to you.
Yeah.
Like, that's an example of how we should do things when we see something in somebody's life. That's what the Bible says, to approach that person. And so they did that. That's That's such a cool story. I know at the time I probably would have been, you know, like that's when your defenses go up
You're
and
right.
everything. Yeah, yes, and our kids can really humble us, and they're not speaking it out of anger. They're speaking it out of love, and
Right.
they
That's
really
right.
do notice and they observe everything.
And, along these lines, one of the things is all of my kids had a lot of time with my parents and Joe's parents, and we've been blessed to have a lot of time with our grandkids too. And, in those early years when the boys were rambunctious and, I know they were handfuls for my parents and Joe's parents to keep, it really does bear fruit because as the boys got older, especially my dad was involved in helping them with their careers. Um, Dad had been a lawyer, John was a lawyer, dad had been in sales. My oldest son was in sales, and he was really able to give them great advice. And then as all of our parents lived to be in their 80s and 90s, the boys were still in town and Lizzie was in town for quite a while. And they would I just remember Ty was in medical sales when my dad got sick. And so Daddy had been chairman of the Baptist Hospital System in South Carolina or in Columbia for many years. But Ty was the one who was there finding his doctors for him and getting him the right surgeon for this or the right doctor for that. And John was helping him with just different legal issues of getting older. And he had a bump up, and John took care of the wreck. And then Lizzie was visiting my mother when she was sick and dying. And I thought, oh, this is full circle. This is how we want life to be with the generations or taking care of each other in the different phases and stages of their lives. And I think maybe that's one of the things I love the most about homeschooling. If you don't have parents that you're close to, find older people in your community, at your church. They all, these retirement facilities and assisted living facilities, they love children. If you need a place for your children to serve, visit once a week. I will tell you, the beginning of every new relationship is awkward, but you just have to be content to live in the awkward long enough to develop a relationship with somebody, and it's well worth the price.
That's such a beautiful story, and you're right, we should be pouring into each other's generations and not be so separate and segmented, and that was one of the benefits of homeschooling that I didn't quite realize that we had been missing. Now, we've lived apart from for the past 10 years when we lived in New York, we lived apart from family, but still, my parents have been really involved. And when we first started homeschooling, they were kind of a little bit like, "I don't know about this," but then they came to really like it because when they would visit, at that time my kids were younger, we were only 2 hours away. And they could come out on a Tuesday and stay till Thursday, and they would maybe come out, they'd be like, "We'll be out by lunchtime or so." The kids and I would do a little bit of homeschool first thing in the morning, and then we would take off from any curriculum and academics and just have fun and just enjoy time with my parents. That really helped them to have such a close relationship because we would spend days together. Even though we didn't live in the same town, they got to spend days together, with them, and my parents are like, "I love that you homeschool because we don't always have time on a weekend to come out, but we can come during the week and hang out with you and the kids."
Yeah, that is a special blessing and a special relationship. Well, Lee, one of the things I love about you is that you are giving back to the homeschooling community through your podcast, Little by Little, and through your conference. So tell us a little bit about the podcast and the conference.
Yes, so the podcast came out of I think it was probably 2021 when I started seeing a lot of homeschool moms wanting to homeschool. Prior to that, I had had a DIY blog, and we had fixed up a farmhouse and then another house, and the title of that included the phrase "little by little." And so when I was like, "Okay, I'm getting a lot of questions online, I'm getting a lot of questions from people about homeschool," and I felt like I was like, "Okay, let's close the door on the DIY home stuff," which is great and fun. I love that kind of stuff. But let's move into homeschool. And I was like, "What do I call it? What do I call it?" And I was like, "Wait a minute, little by little homeschool," because that's really how we homeschool, is it just a little bit at a time, and that's how we have homeschooled. So it started off with just helping moms just purely just through social media, and then I was like, a podcast would be kind of fun. So I've been doing that for a couple of years, and then about a year ago, I felt strongly about creating a homeschool conference. I love also, always been, so talking about my brothers and how I would, have them sit down and I would be their teacher. I was also their social director on a Saturday evening, and they had to perform plays with me, and they had to do, dinner theaters. There had to be something. I was the only girl with 3 younger brothers, and so my mom would be like, "Listen, she doesn't ask for much. Put on the costume and play the part."
Oh, that's
And so, I
great.
mean, that grew as things, I've had some different, opportunities before kids where I worked, and I did some, party planning and organizing and that kind of stuff. And I was like, "I could probably do this, combine this gift, this, not to toot my own horn or anything, but just it comes easily to me."
This love, this passion of
Yeah,
yours.
love,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, yeah, and combine it with my passion of homeschool and wanting to encourage homeschool moms, and there isn't a lot in the Northeast. There's a lot of conferences and conventions in a lot of other states, but there isn't a lot here in the Northeast, and so I was like, "What if I do a conference?" I started talking to my husband, and he was all on board. Thank goodness for my family. They help out with so much behind the scenes and then boots on the ground the day of. So we had our first conference last fall, and then our second conference is this October on the 18th in Syracuse, New York, and Zan Tyler is going to be joined by Whitney Newby from Writer Day Press, and you guys are going to be my 2 main speakers, and I'm excited to offer a day of just a feeling, and this was my goal, and I heard a lot of feedback. It just felt like a retreat, just a reprieve, and just a day just to feel, encouraged to keep on going, to, again, take that next step and to just, one foot in front of the other, and the camaraderie being amongst other Christian homeschool moms was just it was amazing. So that's, kind of, how that all came to be.
I love the fact that you talked about how hard it was at times never to have a break and have that kind of encouragement. And so I love the fact that you have started something to fill that void in moms' lives that you had. And I think that's really special. And homeschool moms and dads out there, I would encourage you when your last child graduates or is close to graduation, don't just leave the homeschooling community. Look and see, even if it's one family that you mentor or bring along or get involved in your state organization or do what Leigh did, start a conference or a podcast. I will tell you, podcasting is not for the faint of heart. They say that like 90% of people don't podcast for 3 months in a row or something. I don't know. I used to know the statistics. I don't anymore. I do know it's work. I love it, but it's a weekly commitment, just like your podcast is a weekly commitment for you. So don't forget about the people. Remember what it was like when you were young and homeschooling and needed help and support and give back in that way. So Leigh, tell people how they can find your podcast and find out about the conference.
Yes. So the podcast can be found on whatever podcast app you're listening to right now. Just search for Little by Little Homeschool and you'll find it. My website houses everything, including the conference. You can go to littlebylittleHomeschool.com and you'll find there in the menu, there'll be a link for the conference. You can go ahead and get tickets and hopefully see. We've got moms coming from all over the place. I've had moms even fly in last year, and we're only a couple hours from the Canadian border. So if you're listening in Canada, it's not too far. You can still come too.
See Niagara Falls.
Yes.
And it's not far, I don't think, from Deerfoot Lodge.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, we were talking about that, about 2
yes.
hours from the Adirondacks.
Yes,
Mhm.
and which are just beautiful areas. Both of our boys used to go to Deerfoot up in Schenectady, I think, or Speculator. That's where it
Exactly.
was,
Yep.
New York.
Yep.
And so we have a real fondness for that area and a real gratitude to the people there. So as we close, we know the new school year is beginning. If you had one piece of advice or a Bible verse you want to share with moms and dads that are listening today, what would you tell them?
Yes, I'm gonna combine those 2 with the Bible verse with what my encouragement would be, and it was probably about 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years into homeschooling, and the verse of Philippians 4:8 really hit me in a new way, where it says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things." And I use that as the litmus test or the plumb line for what we were going to do. How are we going to spend our time? What resources, what curriculum we're going to use, what co-ops we're going to join, what sports activities, how movies we were going to watch, what books we were going to read. Does it meet this standard? And really trying to be intentional about what I was pouring into the kids so that they had that standard of what was, what is truth, what is true, and what is honorable. Just going through this list, and I had it hanging, I had printed it out. You don't need anything fancy, just print it out on a Word document, just made maybe some fancy script or something, and hung it up in our homeschool area. And it was just the way that I would decide what we were going to do. And so as you're going into this homeschool year, just take a look at what your plans are. Do they meet these? Sometimes we can have too many plans. And I always say, like, scrap some of them. Start off a little bit slow, scrap some of them. You can always add things in, but use God's word. Use how He wants you to spend your time as the litmus test, as the way of deciding how you're going to spend your time. And it's okay to cut back on some things. And it's okay if you say, you know what, these movies that we're watching, or this music we're listening to, or this curriculum isn't quite meeting that. It's okay to go ahead and put it aside, replace it with something else. But that's just kind of a verse that really hit me. And so probably the past 10 years or so, it's been what I have used to help us decide how we're going to spend our time.
Oh, wow. That is really powerful and a lot for us to think about as we close the podcast and go on with our week. Well, Leigh, thank you so much for being with us. It has been such a joy, and I've learned so much just by having you here on the podcast. And as always, I want to thank our audience, our moms and dads who listen faithfully. Thank you for spending your time with us. I know you have a lot of different things you could be doing with this 30 minutes. So thank you for being here. And until next time, may God continue to bless you and your family in your journey. Bye.